Muchas gracias. Es un placer estar acá. Y I'm going to be talking today. Voy a hablar en inglés. Ah, no, lo siento, pero
Thanks.
puedo hablar un poquito en español, pero para la presentación en inglés. And I'm going to talk today about claim matching, tip lines, and collaboration to fight against disinformation. And I need to turn off the translation so that I don't hear the translation. Um, Perfect. So I don't need to tell this group that, as we're working online, we're finding all sorts of misinformation and sometimes disinformation, purposely wrong content. But I think it's important to put some of this into perspective. Not all misinformation is equally harmful. And so, some things, like maybe this example that, UNESCO declaró el himno nacional argentino es el mejor del mundo. It's not, correct, but it's not particularly harmful. Maybe it makes you smile a bit, right? But then we can think about more troubling misinformation that maybe interferes with democracy or questions democratic processes. Spam and phishing emails that may prevent economic harm, as well as, of course, what we've all become very familiar with in the last year, health misinformation that could actually present a sort of risk to life. And I think this pagoda of harms from Full Fact in the United Kingdom is a really helpful diagram to think about misinformation online. And so there already, of course, are a whole bunch of initiatives trying to find potential misinformation and respond to it. From a platform's perspective, they can often search for unusual patterns, look at content that's becoming popular, maybe examine reactions, and look for matches to previously fact-checked content. And you can see examples of this on, say, Facebook, where they'll screen misinformation that has been checked through their fact-checking program and explain why it has a potential potentially is misleading. But this sort of thing is much harder to do on encrypted platforms. So things like WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, Line. In those instances, the platforms actually don't have access to any of the content. And so at Meedan, we've been thinking about how can we help fact checkers identify problematic content on these platforms? How can we help users of these platforms to be able to submit content for fact checking or find out if some of the content they're looking at is false already? And we're doing this really thinking about how do we bring together the best of human intelligence. I don't think we're going to be replacing fact-checking organizations anytime soon. I'm a computer scientist, and I think there's great roles for computers in this, but we also need human intelligence. We really need critical thinking and humans at the core of this. And so I'm going to talk today a bit about how we can bring together, the best in human intelligence with the best in machine intelligence, and put those together to think about what should we be fact checking, how can machines help fact checkers, and then thinking about the bigger picture about how do we collaborate and bring together different groups, academics, fact checkers, community leaders to address mis and disinformation online. So what to fact check? As I mentioned, Meedan is this nonprofit that is building technology, and one of the main software products that Meedan builds is called Check. It's a system for fact checking that many fact checking organizations are using, and often running tip lines through this. And the idea of a tip line is that you could be on a platform that you're already using, a messaging platform, let's say. If you see a piece of content, you want to submit it to the fact-checking organization, see if there's already a fact check about it, or if not, hopefully encourage, bring it to the attention of the fact-checking organization so that they can consider whether they should fact check that or not. There's actually now 18 partners, this slide is a little bit out of date, who are running tip lines on WhatsApp through the WhatsApp third-party fact-checking program using Meedan's software to support that. And there are also groups running tip lines on Telegram or Facebook Messenger as well. And this is sort of what a tip line looks like, right? It's just an account on social media. The idea is you could message in and say, hey, I got sent this thing. Here's the piece of content I'm going to forward in, and I can submit that. And it will be acknowledged that the content was received. And immediately we want to go search all the existing fact checks from that organization. If there's a match, we'll return it immediately. And if there's not a match, we'll put it into the system so that fact checkers can consider whether that might be something worth fact checking. This is what it looks like from the fact checker side. We can see the number of requests that a piece of content has. We can see if there's similar pieces that have come in, maybe if there's matches on other platforms. Has it been shared on Twitter? Is it circulating in public Facebook groups, etc.? And then when a fact checker wants to work on something, they go through actually a much more difficult process to actually fact check the piece of content, but then can compose back a response, add in an image as needed, and then send that out to the tip line, just like we've seen in the previous example. So I'm a researcher by training, and so I'm always skeptical of these things. And I had this question at the beginning. It was like, well, we're putting a lot of effort into this. Do tip lines really work? And so we had a unique opportunity during the 2019 Indian elections to start to address that question. Our software, Meedan's software check, had been being used to support a tip line that was being run by Proto in India during this time. And at the same time, Kiran Garamella, a researcher at Rutgers University now, was collecting data from public groups on WhatsApp. He was searching across the internet, looking for links to join these WhatsApp groups. They'd join the group and they'd have an automated script capture all of the messages in those groups. And so we had a good opportunity to say, well, how do these two methods compare, right? What comes into the tip line? How does that compare to what can be scraped if you try to find these public groups on WhatsApp? And so we looked into the content that was coming through the tip lines. We saw that they did receive a lot of valuable content. So amongst the top images and text, the images here on the left, these were the top three. They're doctored screenshots, supposed Pakistani flags, a government circular that were all false and in fact checked to be false. On the side of the tips, again, some misleading content. Some of it, not particularly harmful. The top item actually was this sort of idea of UNESCO declaring India's national anthem the best in the world. That was the inspiration for the example I showed earlier. But some things that are more concerning about voting, for instance, and where and how to vote. We found that the tip lines did capture popular content. If an image or a text message was shared at least 100 times in the public groups, 2/3 of the time we'd find those images, or a quarter of the time we'd find the text message on the tip line as well. I also should say that the tip lines found content that didn't appear in the public groups. And so there was also unique content that these tip lines were finding. And they were finding that content pretty fast. In fact, about 80% of the time we'd see content, for the popular content at least, appear in the tip line before it appeared in the public groups. So a few takeaways from this is that I think tip lines actually are quite exciting way to involve users of social media platforms in sort of suggesting content to fact checkers, and for them to be able to search existing fact checks, right? And it's sort of a new source. I also think there's nice opportunity here for academics to better understand and try to build new tools for this. I think this only works together, though. A lot of the messages to the tip line were actually specifically about fact checking. I don't think this would work as an academic project on its own, but I think it worked because it was was backed by a strong group, Proto, who were doing verification during this time. And yeah, the big takeaway being that the tip lines could discover popular content in a timely manner. I want to talk about a few other ways that I think technology can be really helpful to support human fact-checking. So a lot of content online actually can't be fact-checked, right? So here on the left of this screen, there's a tweet from the Prime Minister in the UK wishing people a happy St. Patrick's Day. There's nothing to fact check there. Even if he's wrong in some way, it's not going to be something that can be fact checked. Whereas the one on the right can be fact checked. And again, Full Fact has been doing some great work on this, as has the University of Texas at Arlington, on discovering trying to separate out claims. What can be fact checked from more general claims that maybe can't be fact checked. Again, potential harm, we've talked about that. I think this can be really helpful in deciding what to fact check. We want to focus on the content that maybe presents the most harm or the risk for the most harm. I think, as we think about public health, there's probably a lot of levels within public health as well. So Meedan has a digital health lab team, and I know one of the things that my collaborators there have been thinking about is how do you create a hierarchy of harm within public health? What are the things that maybe are a risk but not immediate risk, and which are the things that are the most serious risks? And finally, prevalence is one that I want to talk a little more about. If a piece of misinformation isn't particularly popular or isn't particularly prevalent, we often don't want to amplify it. Right? And so we don't want, to look at fringe pieces of content and tell lots of people about them. But on the other hand, it's not always clear what prevalence looks like, because if you group together content making the same claims, you may find that it's actually much more prevalent than it first appeared. If I looked at this first tweet, I think, oh, it's not very prevalent, but the second one, much more so. And in fact, what we see throughout these tip lines and now the multiple partners that Meedan is supporting is that we see the same claims being sent in multiple times across languages, across formats, as images, as text, but they all do so in slightly different ways. They use slightly different phrasings, slightly different words, and even different languages. And so if we really want to understand how prevalent or how popular a piece of content is, we need a way to be able to match these pieces of content together. And so that's something that my research team has been working on particularly. And earlier this summer, we presented some work at a natural language processing conference directly on this. And particularly, we want to know how to go beyond English. How can we match similar content making the same claims, but move it across languages and especially find solutions for non-English languages. One of the challenges is that often we have some really good models in English. We often have lots of data in English, but we really want to make this work in other languages. And so one of the things that we've been working on and borrowing from techniques in the literature is to say, how can we use, say, translated data and be able to teach a new model to perform as well in a non-English language as it does in an English language. And we tested this out in a bunch of Indian languages, and we trained this model over here, and I won't go into depth on this, but in the end, we were able to show that we were able to create this model that could perform very well, not only in English, but also in less represented languages, right? In Malayalam or Hindi and Tamil as well. Of course, it's not just image. So we've been working a lot on grouping similar images. Sorry, not just text. Right? We've been grouping similar images, similar audio files. similar video files. And in fact, thinking about how do you match across these different formats as well. And so we can match the audio channel of video with just an audio file being circulated online. Or we can pull text out of a photo and match that to a text claim. And we can transcribe audio and video as well. And so there's still a lot of work that we have to do there. But we're hoping that we can get much better at matching content when it appears multiple times. And so the hard work of fact checkers doesn't need to be repeated time and time again, but that we can take the result, we can take that fact check and attach it to all of the content that it's relevant for. I'll briefly say that there's some things I think that we can do in assisting human fact checkers as well. So the ability to better search existing databases of fact checks. Has someone else already fact checked this? Knowledge bases. I mentioned the Digital Health Lab team at Meedan. They've been putting together this resource called Health Desk, where they're distilling some of the latest scientific research and trying to make that accessible and usable by fact-checking organizations and others. So how can we, maybe highlight relevant content out of claims like that? There's work on what we call stance detection. Can we find, given a claim, can we go out and find content that might support it, refute it, or that maybe just a bit neutral to it? We can do the same thing with reactions. And if someone posts something, we could look at the comments and maybe we could use that to start to flag if it's likely that something might be false, or maybe it's inviting controversy as well. And we could use controversy, which is something that a collaborator of mine, OCode, is working on doing. Of course, I think there's so much out there, but there's often this gap between what academics are working on, what fact-checking organizations are doing, and even maybe what users are, what people are really facing on a day-to-day basis using different platforms. And so this is a brand new initiative, literally announced last week, or the beginning of this week, I should say, which is a National Science Foundation project called FactChamp. And we're going to be trying to work to see how we can lower the barriers to collaboration between academics, fact-checking organizations, and community leaders. In particular, we really want to think about how we can make it easier to share data between these groups. But we want to make sure we do it securely, especially when you think about disinformation, where there's a malicious actor specifically trying to spread their content. This sort of data sharing could be really helpful to the malicious actor, right? Which we don't want. We don't want the malicious actor to be able to understand, how much of my misinformation, my disinformation has been caught and flagged by users? What are the fact checkers saying about my campaign, right? And so we want to be able to share that data securely. Also, it may have private data in it if it's coming from social networking platforms, or particularly encrypted platforms like WhatsApp or Telegram. We don't want to just publicly share that data. So we really want to make it secure and allow that data to be only used in specific ways. We want to allow community users to be able to highlight problematic content that's facing their communities, and give them the tools to respond effectively. The previous speaker, Tamara, was speaking about sort of the resources that they were creating, and then how each of the groups would deploy those in different ways depending on what their local conditions required. And I think that's the same thing likely with responding to disinformation. It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. We need to empower community leaders and others so that they can adapt and send the messages in the right way that resonates with their communities. For academics, we want to try to focus them on some of the challenges and real-world data sets that represent problems that people are facing in practice. And finally, for fact-checking organizations and community leaders, hopefully what we want to do is enable these insights and any machine learning tools or algorithms that come out of research to be more easily used in practice. It's not enough to say there's a paper there's some code now on GitHub. We really want to make these things shovel ready, ready to make a difference, every day. And so that's where I want to wrap up here. There's a bunch of links. I'll happily share these as well. And really looking forward to the questions and discussions later. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Scott, a ti por esta presentación, por todos los ejemplos que nos has traído y además los links a las herramientas que seguramente esto ya va a haber participantes que van a estar pidiendo los enlaces para poder seguir investigando sobre este tema. Nos han llegado algunas preguntas, tenemos en el chat. Este es momento también, aprovecho para decir que pueden dejarlas por aquí o por medio del sistema de preguntas y respuestas, y desde ya seguir la conversación por las redes sociales con nuestro hashtag Cumbre Desinfo, o también etiquetándonos en las redes sociales. Así que tenemos una pregunta que nos llega en inglés, vamos a hacerla en inglés y en español. Nos dice, ¿cómo es que se analiza la frase que mencionaste, la afirmación sobre la programación neurolingüística, la inteligencia artificial, o en todo caso de los recursos humanos? No sé si se entiende, no sé en qué parte de la presentación fue, o sea, de cómo se analiza la afirmación, the claim.
Yes, thank you. It's a great question, and sorry I didn't make that clear. The work that Meedan is doing, at the end of the day, we have human fact checkers who are analyzing claims and ultimately deciding, how something should be annotated and what fact check should go with it. But I think what's really important is that it's not a purely human effort, but we need NLP or AI to support that effort, to help with the mundane things like managing the conversation and collecting those claims, or understanding prevalence, matching to previous instances of that claim and saying, oh, there's already a fact check for this new piece of misinformation that's come in. It's already been fact checked, so we can respond to the user directly. So those things can be done right by a machine, using natural language processing to say, hey, is there an existing fact check, something like that. But when there's something new that we haven't seen before, in that case, we want a human to ultimately make that decision. I don't think we're there yet to have a fully automated solution that could decide is something correct or incorrect, or what's the context for it.
Muy bien, gracias, Scott. Nos llegan más preguntas. ¿Cómo funciona el mensaje de WhatsApp que envían los usuarios? ¿Cómo se aseguran que lo verificado sea exactamente lo que pregunta el usuario? Esto ya en referencia a la experiencia que nos contaste.
Yeah, and I would say this is one of the challenges that I've seen working from academia versus in practice with fact checkers. In academia, we often say, well, we'll look at things that sort of most of the time are right, right? And we go, well, it's sort of on balance, we'll get most things right and it's okay. I think when we work with fact checkers, we really have to be certain about the responses. So we've set these thresholds and the way that we're using the models pretty conservatively, in the sense that we want the model to be very certain that the new message coming in does match an existing fact check before we send it back. If we're not sure, we'll actually pause and we'll prompt the fact checking teams using the software to look at that potential match, and then they can confirm it, or they can say, actually, that's not a good match. And we can use that data actually to continually improve the machine. And so I think we're getting better and better at ensuring that, yes, when we send back a fact check, that it does actually match the original message coming in. And we're also working to provide that feedback. So we make it very clear to the user what is being fact checked, and that the user ultimately receiving that, say on WhatsApp, could indicate this isn't the same thing I was asking. I really do need a second assessment here. I need a human assessment of this.
Bien, tenemos más preguntas que nos llegan. Pregunta Lidia Calle, ¿qué sucede con las o los personajes que generan la desinfodemia? ¿Se los puede denunciar? ¿Qué sucede al respecto? En otras palabras, ¿qué podemos hacer, Scott, frente a este tema?
I'm sorry, I missed that. I should turn on translation. That would help me. Could you repeat that one more time?
Sí, claro. ¿Qué sucede con los personajes que generan la desinfodemia? ¿Se los puede denunciar de algún modo? ¿Qué podemos hacer frente a esto? Desde el lado de los usuarios, por supuesto.
Yeah, I think this is a real challenge. I mean, what we want to do, I think, is to empower users, right? We don't want to tell people this is right or wrong, or you must do this or not, or take down content. That's not what we want to do. But we do want to help people understand what are the things that are scientifically certain, and what are the verified information, and then what are rumors and things that are spreading falsehoods, right? And be able to ultimately help people make those informed decisions. And so I think it's a lot about highlighting the sort of problems with the information that's out there. And as you dig into what's happening, or a lot of the disinformation that's out there, you can demonstrate, you can show how this is coming from disreputable actors, or how it conflicts with other content. And so I think being able to help people understand that, in sort of show them the reasons why it's disinformation, is really important. More important than simply saying it's right or wrong. It's important to show why.
Perfecto, queda clarísimo. Y hay algo que acá, a lo largo de estos 2 días de encuentros que hemos tenido sobre la desinformación, ya queda claro que es necesaria la colaboración entre los ciudadanos, los medios y los líderes para poder evitar la desinformación. Entonces, Imelda Fernández hace su pregunta: ¿qué pasa cuando son los gobiernos o los políticos que utilizan estos métodos, incluso siguiendo las políticas informativas, para desinformar? ¿Qué podemos hacer en ese caso, Scott? ¿La tecnología podrá ayudarnos?
Yeah, absolutely. It's and I think that there's a real challenge here, right, where we may think that we can rely on government information in some contexts. That's not true in every country. In some countries, you actually can't trust the government to be reporting accurate figures or information. And I think what's really important in many ways then is that collaboration, and it's international collaboration as well, so that we can sort of compare and exchange that data across boundaries. There was a question also in the chat about whether WhatsApp messages are only in English or not. And no, the software supports language, actually any language can be, a fact check can be written in any language, and we'll serve back fact checks in whatever language we can that matches the requests coming in. And so I think it's one thing that's really important when we think about regional disinformation as well is to think, well, maybe there's sort of information or solidarity across different organizations that can support that response, and so it's not just one organization against a government saying that's not true, right? You can bring in scientific evidence, you can bring in support, and other organizations can also all work to really show how this, this doesn't make sense or this doesn't add up.
Clarísimo. Muchas gracias, Scott Hale, por acompañarnos en esta cumbre, en este conversatorio sobre desinformación y tecnología. Queda claro que hemos hecho avances, la tecnología puede ayudarnos, pero eso todavía no alcanza. Tenemos que seguir investigando, conociendo las herramientas e ideando nuevas soluciones para poner freno a la desinformación.